dollar regaining a little bit of footing. Is there much traction in that, do you think?
Yes, I think there is a degree of traction that's starting to be built. I think it's notable that we've seen US Treasury yields squeezing back up towards 270 as well, which I think is also consistent with a slightly stronger dollar in terms of the yield spreads. So I think on the assumption that markets are believing that the Republicans and Democrats are inching towards some degree of resolution, whether that be some kind of temporary clean spending bill being put through the House or something more substantive, I think the markets are getting a little bit of a lift. And also on the assumption that if we can get some kind of resolution on the debt side, then of course that puts the Fed not back into play for this month, but certainly back into play for December.
I was going to ask you think December's still on the table, do you?
Yes, I think it is. Assuming that we do get some degree of resolution within the next few days, and of course that is still a very big if, and we're stepping away from that sort of default type scenario that obviously has been overhanging the market. Now, clearly, the longer the impasse goes on, the greater the risk to consumer sentiment, and I suspect we will see that reflected in the Michigan numbers tomorrow, which could well destabilise the dollar perhaps temporarily into the weekend. But assuming that we're talking about a temporary blip here, then I think then December is still realistically on the table, and we can see the Fed starting to progress with the process of tapering before we see the transition in terms of the Fed leadership.
Are we going to get much out of Washington from the G20?
I suspect not. As ever, I think people always have relatively high expectations of G20s, and generally, if you go in with a low enough bar of expectation and hope, then you'll probably just about meet that. And I think it's a case that we shouldn't expect for too much this time around. I'm sure we will get some degree of warm words suggesting that obviously the various administrations need to do whatever is necessary to maintain a steady progressive growth scenario into 2014 and not do anything to derail that. But I wouldn't suspect anything more than that.
Bank of England today, of course, the growth versus guidance debate continues. Sterling was hit by those weak numbers yesterday, the industrial production numbers. Do you believe in the recovery here?
Yes, I think we are. I mean, clearly the industrial production reports yesterday were very disappointing, although I would look at the degree of contraction in utility output and underline that that was the primary factor in terms of the headline IP. But clearly it does drag somewhat on expectations for Q3 GDP. But nevertheless, we are still in a relatively upbeat growth phase. Now, you can argue and debate whether that growth is the right kind of growth, whether we're encouraging consumer-led spending on debt-fueled growth and impacting by the housing market. That's a separate debate. But I think the recovery story is on track. I think the Bank of England will be largely a non-event today. I think it's just a case of merely investors just scanning the screen at 12 o'clock to make sure there is no change.